Have you ever heard of Morgan Spurlock before? If you've ever seen Super Size Me before, you might have. He did something that most people never get to. He was able to turn $65,000 into a $22 million return that got him an Oscar nomination and built an entire career as a documentary filmmaker. His idea, to eat nothing but McDonald's for 30 days to see the impacts on his health. From the moment the film came out, he faced a lot of criticism for the way he conducted his experiment and not fully revealing the exact diet he kept. This is not necessarily so surprising now, in an era where any kind of outrageous behavior for clicks is commonplace. But in 2004, this was seen as deeply disturbing and terrifying. It might have easily seen worse than this already. He would go on to make several more films and series after that, but none of them would reach the heights of his first film. But he would end up ending his own career by publicly confessing to sexual misconduct in the wake of Harvey Weinstein's reveal as a longtime sexual predator, having most of the staff of his production company quit in protest. He has made no public appearances since 2019, and it seems that as of right now, Spurlock will never work in the film industry again. In this confession, Spurlock not only admitted to sexual misconduct, but also that he had not been sober in the past 30 years of his life. This immediately caused his critics to conclude that this must have also included the filming of Super Size Me itself, casting all of his physical symptoms during the film's production into doubt. Most of his symptoms correlated far more closely to alcohol abuse than overeating, and it would have shown that he was lying to the health professionals he hired to monitor his health, whether intentionally or unconsciously. Even in the film itself, he is shown actively claiming sobriety during a time where, according to this confession, he was not sober.
Any alcohol use?
Now, none.
The past decade and change have shown multiple people conducting tests of their own to prove that the experiment was fatally flawed, and showing that you could eat only McDonald's without eating too many calories, though it would still be unbelievably unhealthy. But that is not really what fascinates me the most about Morgan Spurlock and his very strange career. What fascinates me the most is the structure of the film itself and what it reminds me of the most. Spurlock's film feels identical to the kind of content we are oversaturated with today. Yet his film came out before this became ubiquitous to social media. It had its own theatrical release, and all of his work was either released in theaters or on television. Almost nothing he worked on appeared in social media, despite YouTube itself being created shortly after the film's release. In all intents and purposes, Spurlock had accidentally become an influencer before the term even existed. It looks exactly the same, the format is the same. Even his personality on camera feels the same.
Look at that Coke. That barely fits in there. Oh shit. I was gonna, look at that. Look at how big that thing is. Look how big that French fry is. That thing is like 4 feet tall.
So that begs a question I have not found anywhere else. How come Spurlock didn't capitalize on this? It feels like he missed a massive opportunity to be able to become one of the biggest influencers on the planet, given how much money it made and how famous he had become when it first came out. Imagine what could have happened if he pivoted immediately after making the film to new media and seen his career explode as a result. And as we will come to learn, Spurlock had an even greater opportunity that he realized to capitalize on the internet, to bring his career to the next level, and didn't. And that's what we will be exploring today, this massive missed opportunity for someone who had a moment of genuine fame and squandered all of it. I can't even really say that I like the film, for as dishonest as its framing has turned out to be, and all the unethical actions of its creator. None of this is meant to minimize the harm he has caused, and I also can't speak to the ways he may have tried to make amends to these harmful actions. One has to wonder, how could anyone in his shoes miss this trend by so much when he made it big at the right time? That's what we're going to look at today. How this permanent fixture of high school classrooms could have once been so much more. This is a different look at Super Size Me, 20 years after it was released.
Rock and roll McDonald's! Rock and roll McDonald's! Rock and roll McDonald's! Rock and roll McDonald's!
What is fascinating about Morgan Spurlock and his body of work is how he was arguably the very last of a kind of person before the advent of a site that would completely shift the way we view media. If you watch Super Size Me, and I wouldn't personally, you'll notice that pretty much the entire thing, save a few scenes, looks exactly like vlogs, in the very infancy of that medium. The difference between Spurlock and generations of vloggers and influencers is that A, he spent $65,000 to make what would cost nothing for you and me, and B, that he was able to get a theatrical release for this feature-length vlog. Seeing this kind of shot now is ordinary, but in 2004, this approach was almost completely unheard of. It is strikingly amateurish for a film that cost almost 6 figures to make. If there's really an instance of things were different back then, it's that you could make what looked like a home video and make $22 million off of something like this. Here's the thing though. Spurlock had actually used the internet as part of his career before Super Size Me, but it hadn't worked out so well for him. His previous project before this was a show called I Bet You Will, airing initially online and then on MTV in 2002, where Spurlock is the show's creator and one of its hosts. Very little footage of it exists today, and I couldn't find any with Spurlock himself hosting, but it was very much in the vein of Jackass, convincing total strangers to engage in humiliating stunts for money.
You're gonna put on the official I Bet You Will see-through pants.
Okay.
Then we're going to put 10 non-venomous snakes in those pants. Stand there with those snakes in your pants for 5 minutes, and for that, I'm gonna give you $50.
More money.
That combination, making an asset of yourself on camera, would then change after that as Spurlock dreamed up his next project, with himself as the test subject and not just the host. That this initially existed online but largely failed to make an impact is a strange coincidence with the way Super Size Me achieved initial success and infamy, but largely faded out of the cultural zeitgeist in a short time. The failure of I Bet You Will proves that Spurlock was born just a couple years too early, since content with just as little research and effort can hit millions of views nowadays. If anything, the man could have been a powerhouse of a content creator if he had only embraced new media when his 15 minutes of fame began, if he had stuck to his original instinct, even if that instinct was to make strangers humiliate themselves for money. Keep that in mind as we go forward, because that's the centerpiece of our time together today. Something that Spurlock takes great lengths to show before the binge is his raw food diet, which already suggests an entirely vegan diet before these became more normalized. His final meal with his then girlfriend, Alex Jameson, before his binge is exactly the kind of thing that has been mocked and parodied in 1,000 films and shows before it.
I'd like you to sign my petition. Yeah.
Get out of my way, you hippie freak.
Are you aware of the senseless wholesale slaughter of the flatulating acid-spitting Zamzizaru? Yeah.
He takes great lengths at the start of the film to show what fantastic health he's in, spending almost solid half an hour of the film repeatedly making this point, over and over again. He is very much someone who eats far less fast food than the average American, by his own words. This already feels, in an age of more transparency and sincerity, more than a little bit like projection. But I'd like you to keep track of this moment for a little bit later when it becomes relevant again.
If somebody were doing this to their liver with alcohol, they could theoretically wipe out the liver, wipe out all the liver cells and there'd be a liver failure. Now, I've never heard of anybody doing this to their liver with a high-fat diet.
The actual film itself is pretty straightforward. Most of it is just Spurlock going about his daily life, working, eating McDonald's, having physical reactions very few people do eating food this unhealthy, seeing his health completely collapse in on itself.
My stomach feels horrible this morning. It doesn't feel good at all.
I've started to have like some not chest pains, but like pressure. I feel like I got pressure on my chest. So I figure that's probably not a good thing.
I just feel really depressed, for no reason. I mean, things are going great. We've had a good day.
I feel horrible today. My headache's coming back again. It feels like somebody's yanking on the tendons behind my eyes. My body officially hates me.
He feels the call of the red carpet, one that he didn't even know he would be able to get access to at this point in his life, and it is far too loud. He understood that this kind of footage, the closest to a safe-for-work snuff film you can get, could be a calling card after over a decade toiling away in the film industry with no fame and fortune to show for it. That could make a man hungry for something more than Big Macs. It's a hunger that many an American film student has been conditioned into. It's a hunger that I have felt myself before, and for that I could sympathize with him. It is clear that this is a man who is obsessively hungry for building a career for himself. This is not completely related, but watching it again for the first time in 20 years, only being a little kid, when I saw it for the first time, I also wanted to list, very briefly, a list of things that I felt kind of uncomfy about watching again, just for funsies. I think the biggest one, and most obvious one, is the prominent placement of Jared Fogle, the former Subway spokesperson, in the film. At the time, this was around 10 or so years before Spurlock and the rest of the world would discover his secret of being a child predator. We also have to factor in the hypocrisy of Spurlock specifically criticizing McDonald's, a multinational corporation selling extremely unhealthy food with decades of abusive workplace practices, and then acting as if Subway is a viable alternative despite them doing the exact same thing, by virtue of uncritically promoting Fogle's misinformation. There is this joke about Spurlock fantasizing about beating his own children if they ever eat fast food.
That's why, when I have kids, every time I drive by a fast food restaurant, I'm gonna punch my kid in the face.
There is this conversation, where one of his talking heads openly fantasizes about harassing fat people in public and imagining a scenario in which people are harassed for smoking, which he compares to obesity. And I have never once seen anyone being harassed in public for smoking, so I don't know the validity of his argument.
And I was wondering, what if this guy, instead of confronting the smoker, had said to the large woman, "What's the matter with you, you fat pig? Don't you know how dangerous it is to be so overweight? Stop eating, for God's sake, and don't you dare get dessert, and what's the matter with you," right? So the question is, at what point will it become acceptable to publicly hector fat people in the way that the smokers are publicly hectored?
And I think more than anything else, his thesis revolves around blaming the consumer and not even being especially interested in holding McDonald's accountable for all the gross things that they have done. This is ironic given what we will later learn about how the film was finished in the first place and how come he was having so many bizarre symptoms during the binge. But all that being said, it did work. For all of its faults, it had hit at the exact right moment. For 65,000 clams, he gets $22 million in return from it and an Oscar nomination. He's able to follow it up with a book called Don't Eat This Book, where he has rebranded himself as a fast food expert whose only real experience was binging for 30 days straight and then having to force himself out of it. The reaction is polarizing. From the moment it's released, it's bringing in more controversy. People are already making plans to debunk him. McDonald's abandons his trademark Super Size Me option a few weeks later, which to this day is unclear whether or not the release of the film actually causes this. What can be said, as an aside, is how much the film is accidentally a time capsule for a lot of McDonald's features which simply don't exist anymore. The most obvious is the supersize, which no restaurant has anymore, but play places are gone. Happy Meals are gone, except as nostalgic tie-ins for adult fans. McDonald's now looks and acts almost nothing like one from 20 years ago, aside from the logo and basic menu items. It no longer possesses any kind of brand identity, and its bundle of mascots only appear as blatant social media stunts.
What's up, guys? We just got the Grimace Shake from McDonald's. Happy birthday, Grimace. We're gonna give it a try. Seems like it's good.
What's also been documented by other creators is the sheer vitriol of the response to him when the first film came out in a way I've seen for very few other people. Spurlock's work seems very similar to that of another filmmaker called Michael Moore, who would spend the 1980s to early 2010s making documentaries about a variety of subjects, all relating to forms of systemic injustice. The thing that Moore did, that Spurlock also does, is insert himself as the main subject of these films, even when he personally has nothing to do with it. This worked out for him in his debut film, Roger and Me, where he documents the effects of deindustrialization in his hometown of Flint, Michigan, a situation that personally affected him. But every subsequent film, save for a 20-minute sequel he made to Roger and Me, has increasingly annoyed audiences and film critics, no matter what points he made, because he couldn't help but center himself in every single part of it.
This is not to say that Moore was universally incorrect on all the various points he made. He infamously tarnished his own career by critiquing America's invasion of Iraq upon winning an Oscar, and turned out to be completely vindicated on that front.
We live in a time where we have a man sending us to war for fictitious reasons, whether it's the fictition of duct tape or the fictitious of orange alerts. We are against this war, Mr. Bush. Shame on you, Mr. Bush. Shame on you. And anytime you've got the Pope and the Dixie Chicks against you, your time is up. Thank you very much.
But by the time Spurlock shows up, someone who by all counts is way more charismatic and approachable than he is, his career would already be dwindling and he would have become a pop culture joke.
As the protesters inside Red Robin unite together, word is that filmmaker Michael Moore has joined the protesters outside.
I look out of the faces of you protesters and I see the future of America. We are the 99%. Yeah!
I have not found any interviews where Spurlock mentions Moore directly, but their styles of vlogging before vlogs are just too similar to ignore.
We're striking hard at Serbia's machinery of repression while making a deliberate effort to minimize harm to innocent people. We all know there has been a terrible shooting at a high school in Littleton, Colorado. I hope the American people will be praying for the students, the parents, and the teachers.
I just I'm not even halfway done with those fries. I'm in halfway. It's like a workout.
See, now's the time of the meal when you start getting the McStomach ache.
You start getting the McTummy, you get the McGurgles in there, you get the McBrick, and you get the McStomachache.
We can kind of see his two main influences here from both his previous work in I Bet You Will and Super Size Me itself being so similar to that of Moore. It's like he finds the perfect intersection of Jackass and Michael Moore in order to make his most successful film. And that similarity extends to the response to Spurlock, mostly from people who saw his critiques on McDonald's as an attack on meat-reliant dietary styles. Spurlock repeatedly mentions his ex-wife's vegan diet and how he had a plant-based diet because of her before starting the film. And said ex-wife, Alex Jamieson, wrote a book called The Great American Detox Diet after specifying the exact diet she used to help Spurlock lose the excess weight after the fact. This is what seemed to scare many of Spurlock's harshest critics, that even the suggestion of Spurlock's own personal diet, being a vegan despite briefly opening a fast food chicken restaurant in the second film, was a potential threat to their own diets. A small but very determined counterculture to Spurlock, the Proud Carnivores, were the ones with the loudest and most public responses that drowned out the genuine criticisms of the film. Most famous of these in the subculture is called Fathead, made in 2009 by a guy called Tom Naughton, who made an entire film to disprove the film, which is kind of like proving that the Earth revolves around the sun, no duh. To Naughton's credit, he actually did provide a menu and calorie count of everything he ate during his own month-long McDonald's diet, which is something that Spurlock never did. Unfortunately, the film devotes way more time to Naughton's personal gripes with modern society and eventually devolves to the point where very little of it has anything to do with Spurlock himself.
A lot of kids couldn't walk home from school even if they wanted to. Thanks to a handful of judges, millions of American school children spend 2, 3, even 4 hours a day on one of these. Forget about playing outside until dinner time. When these kids get home, it is dinner time. And once kids do get home, the only exercise a lot of them get is picking up a joystick or a TV remote. Numerous studies have shown that the more TV kids watch, the fatter they tend to be.
Speaking of
My tasty burgers,
when is
Morgan Spurlock,
to start thinking about some
hurting my feelings.
Am I right, ladies? Who killed
Undull Galaxy Tours.
It just made this mildly vegan dude with the porn stash into the personification of everything he hated about society. What was indisputable, and the criticisms that did stick, were those that realized that there was no possible way he could have gained that much weight from McDonald's that quickly unless he messed with the metaphorical scales himself. So little of the actual meals were shown on camera. There was no real way to prove how he had gained so much weight so quickly and why he was having so many inexplicable physical symptoms that he blamed entirely on the month-long binge and nothing else. Spurlock never provided a full menu and calorie count, and to Tom Naughton's credit, despite being a far inferior filmmaker, was at least willing to show his work there. So even in the first few years after, doubt was already being cast on the validity of the film. Spurlock capitalized on this success as best he could, but nothing he made after would ever have the same cultural impact that his first film would. His next two films, Where in the World is Osama bin Laden and The Greatest Film Ever Sold, were attempts to recreate the Super Size Me formula with different topics, literally tracking down Osama bin Laden and making a film about product placement funded by product placement. Neither made anywhere near the same amount of money, and the former literally ends with Spurlock outright giving up on his search upon realizing that he cannot fulfill the premise of his own documentary without breaking international law and potentially being murdered.
Even if I go over the border to find Osama, it's not going to suddenly make the world safer for my kid. Because the things that are out there pushing people to follow him and his ideas are still going to be there. And that's what we have to change. I think that we need to take a step back and really ask ourselves, what kind of a world do we want to live in?
And again, this is fair, for there's no reason that he should kill himself over his art, but it still begs the question of why you would even make a film in the first place and sell it to audiences as if you did the thing you physically could not do. Now sure, that is the literal premise of Super Size Me, but he didn't know how to sell that kind of risk a second time. The most prominent work he made during the next several years was a concert film about the band One Direction, which would become his highest grossing film. Interestingly enough, he was apparently in consideration to make concert films about Justin Bieber and Katy Perry, and was rejected from them both. And his final film would be a sequel to Super Size Me, where he critiques fast food restaurants and the poultry industry further by making a fast food restaurant that gets their product from factory farms. Part of the intention of Super Size Me 2 was to demonstrate exactly how lenient the definition of free range was, with Spurlock intentionally using these misleading standards as part of the way to demonstrate how fast food restaurants and the poultry industry lie to consumers. Now, while this was all true, it was A, not even intended to last longer than a few days, only being a pop-up restaurant at best, and B, was knowingly perpetuating the exact industry standards it claimed to be critiquing, which some people found to be hypocritical. The restaurant which was called Holy Chicken, only ever existed in 2 locations, with the one in the film only being a functioning restaurant in Columbus, Ohio for exactly 4 days. The other opened up in New York City, but its website is no longer functional, and there has been no activity on any of its social media accounts since October 2019, when Spurlock was filmed by a channel called Healthy Junk Food, reviewing his pop-up restaurant before it closed. It seems that as of time of recording, the Holy Chicken franchise no longer exists, and this video serves as Spurlock's last known public appearance. But this would be 2 years after what would eventually end his own career, at least officially, and this was entirely self-inflicted, as we talked about at the beginning of the video. In the wake of Harvey Weinstein being outed as a sexual predator, Spurlock would out his own past experiences of sexual harassment, stating that he believed himself to be, quote, part of the problem. The entire document that he wrote will be made available in the description for anyone who would want to read it, but I would encourage you to exercise caution if you would be sensitive to its contents, as much of it is quite disturbing. His public confessions caused most of his production company staff to quit, and the original distributor, YouTube Red, when that was still a thing, to drop the project, with original Super Size Me distributor Samuel Goldwyn Films buying it. To add more context to this confession was the subsequent reveal of the toxic work culture at Warrior Poets, the production company he founded in the wake of Super Size Me's original success. All this was revealed in an exclusive expose at the site Jezebel, which I will be linking below. Former employees described being pressured to drink excessively during work hours, and often employees could only be allowed to talk to their supervisors if they drank alcohol first. Much of the behavior from all the executives at Warrior Poets, including Spurlock, was continually fixated on women's appearances and behavior. Part of why I want to highlight this is not just Spurlock's own behavior, but the ways it was found in every aspect of his working environment, and the amount of people who did the same things he did. Though these employees speak highly of their coworkers at the same level, it was clear that this toxicity was widespread across its executives. As of recording, Warrior Poets no longer has a functioning website or social media accounts, and all of this indicates that the production company has fully ceased operations in the past few years. There is one section that I would like to highlight that is not about these violations of people's boundaries. In the same document, Spurlock also made a series of personal confessions that either try to give context for his abuse or justify it, and, most tellingly, that he had not been sober for 30 years straight and had spent his entire professional career as a functioning alcoholic. As has been noted by a lot of people at this point, that included the production of Super Size Me. Remember this bit from earlier?
Any alcohol use?
Now, none.
If somebody were doing this to their liver with alcohol, they could theoretically wipe out the liver, wipe out all the liver cells and there'd be in liver failure. Now, I've never heard of anybody doing this to their liver with a high-fat diet.
That became the accidental smoking gun of his entire career. Every single one of the physical symptoms he displayed during the film's production are far less likely to occur around binge eating, regardless of how unhealthy the food is, but are absolutely all symptoms of severe alcoholism. Now, I want to be clear and draw a line in the sand. I am not mentioning this with the intention to shame alcoholism and addiction as a whole, nor is the intent to shame Spurlock for his history with addiction. Addiction is a disease, full stop. It's not a crime. And it has been normalized for so long to shame addicts instead of addressing the systemic issues that leads to greater rates of addiction. The issue with Spurlock here is not that he was or is an addict. The issue is that this was obfuscated in the service of chasing clout and his own personal profit to insufficiently document the results of an experiment that made over $22 million in theaters and got him an Oscar nomination. Given that he spent so much of the film viciously mocking fat people and encouraging others to do the same systemic issues that leads to obesity and a lack of body acceptance can also potentially lead to the addiction that is defined as adult life. Coupling that with the deeply toxic workplace practices at his production company, and all of it feels like an irresponsible use of institutional power. I also do not want to frame obesity in the same terms as addiction. There are a multitude of reasons why some people have larger bodies and statures than others. If Spurlock refused to examine those nuances in his film, then it also stands to reason he would not examine the nuances and how his binging experiment was fatally flawed from the start. Spurlock never claimed to be an academic or a researcher, just a random guy who had no idea how to test for a particular conclusion. To speak personally, it worked on my parents and it worked on me and millions of others because I am not a scientist or a researcher. I am not an expert. My parents were not experts, but they absolutely loved this film when it first came out, and they considered him to be a personal hero. My father actually went to one of his book signings, got a picture with him, had his book signed. That's the extent with which both of my parents and so many others loved what he did. I have an equal amount of nutritional experience as Spurlock does, and it's likely you do too. It makes the experiment, at the time it first released, far more relatable than far drier academic language that isn't trying to entertain anyone. Was Spurlock intentionally trying to lie? I don't believe that he was, based on what I've read and seen. What I do believe is that he did not bother to consider how his extreme alcohol consumption and not using it to calculate his results, and clearly lying to the doctors and trainers he had hired to monitor his health, ultimately poisoned the end results and made them inaccurate. This was a crime of ignorance and neglect more than outright malice, from what I can tell, but that is only my personal read of having seen the film again. Spurlock can both be someone who has caused a lot of harm and did a lot of dishonest things, and has also experienced addiction and has hopefully received the help he needs. It is help that he has greater access to being a wealthy white man in America. Whether he has sought out that help, I have no idea, and I have no interest in finding out. Spurlock has not made any public appearances since making the confession and the video of healthy junk food. And despite everything, the man is owed his privacy as much as anyone else. It would cross a personal ethical line to try and invade the privacy of a person who does not want to be found. And so I've only drawn from materials that Spurlock himself has made publicly available to viewing audiences. And I would ask that you do the same, to respect his privacy and the privacy of the people in his life, including those he has caused harm to. But the thesis I want to make with all of this is not really anything to do with McDonald's or the binge or anything else. It's that both Spurlock and Michael Moore, and every filmmaker like them, missed the boat and didn't even know. Both have been criticized for not really having very much skill as filmmakers beyond their own personalities. Both are incredibly engaging screen presences, but their films are often not visually distinctive and rely entirely on wanting to watch them to engage with their subjects. All this to say, I cannot believe that neither of them pivoted to YouTube right before YouTube really hit it off. I genuinely believe, in spite of everything Spurlock has done wrong, that he would have made the likes of Mr. Beast look like me if he had just pivoted right after the movie was released. Spurlock's destiny that he missed was always new media. Stuff like this. Being an early adopter at the peak of his fame would almost certainly have made him so much wealthier than he already is. Looking at the kinds of people who are giant health influencers, Spurlock was pursuing the exact same thing with outdated tech. He kept on pursuing theatrical releases and cable television exclusively, despite the age of streaming bursting into life around him. Michael Moore is maybe more understandable given that his career had ground to a halt at this point, but Spurlock, he became famous at the exact perfect time to do this. I don't even say this as someone who likes Super Size Me that much, but my parents would have eaten this shit up. They would have paid for his Patreon, and they would have learned how to use Twitch just to go to his live streams. There's a world where Spurlock is legit one of the most famous health experts on the planet and is accused of being a fraud the same way that Dr. Phil is, who, by the way, is not a licensed doctor and hasn't been for decades. Spurlock could have been like that. To watch so many other grifters succeed where Spurlock failed with a fraction of his personality absolutely boggles me. Because hey, I personally don't like him as a filmmaker, but he's amiable and friendly and engaging, and his films don't have any of the manufactured outrage you see in all the guys our boomer and Gen X parents slobber over. He could have been a counterweight, and he could have marketed himself that way. Of course, there's no way to know exactly why it never went down like that. I don't want to just speculate that because of the failure of I Bet You Will's online presence that he just decided never to try that again. Clearly, he knew how to use social media to advertise his films, but it feels perfunctory, just releasing what would appear in theaters and TV in the exact same format, as if audiences react to them the same way. Spurlock caught lightning in a bottle one time and made enough money to last the rest of his life. He will always be an Oscar nominee, and for all of his sexual misconduct, he will probably never have his nomination rescinded the way Harvey Weinstein did. But still, the success he achieved when he achieved it is a fraction of what it could have been. For a single shining moment, he could have leveraged his experiment to become a cultural juggernaut. He did not. I'm not sure if it's better or worse that he didn't. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to watch this video with me. I also wanted to announce that I am now collaborating with some friends of mine on a venture called Jerk Press. And as part of that collaboration, I made a companion zine to this video, which is called Super Zine Me. So in this exclusive zine, I am exploring my personal relationship with Super Size Me and the feelings I have surrounding diet culture in general. It's not the first time that I've written a zine for Jerk Press, and I've really enjoyed all the other stuff that they've released. And I'm really happy to be able to release something else with them once again. There will be a link to be able to look at this and the other releases by Jerk Press in the description. So if you're interested in getting more into zines in general, or if you want to find some new things to read, especially the one pertaining to this video, you should absolutely check that out, and really excited to release more stuff with them in the future. So again, thank you so much for watching this. Hope you can read the companion zine if you want to. So thank you so much.